Oh, I'm being recorded. Oh, okay. Best behavior now. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Oh, somebody else. Okay, Alex, can you admit people when they come in the room? Because
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Let's see. How do I go full screen presentation mode? Okay. Alrighty. So for anyone who just came in, today's presentation should be pretty fast. It's not going to be a coding thing. So soft topic is always faster to present, at least from my perspective as an engineer. So the topic today is about asking for help. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart for a few reasons. As a mentor in the program and just somebody who's helped a bunch of people just remotely, like when I have somebody come to me and ask for help in the good way, I'm really thankful because it makes it really easy to just help. And I want to help people. But sometimes but sometimes when we'll get into this. And the other thing is, this is also a good reminder for myself. Like I've been doing software engineering for, oh gosh, I don't know, 10 plus years. I've been remote for the last 6 years. And just a year and a half ago, I started a new job at Doximity. That's a company that's like over 60% remote. Really, a lot of communication happens kind of in written format over Slack. And at one point, like my manager had to take me aside and be like, dude, you have to work on your like communication, because I was like sending messages in little sporadic bits. And so like he's busy, he's trying to do something and he would get ping, like ping, ping, ping. And so he was like, please, please adjust your communication style. So I was like, oh crap, I'm being a bad communicator and hurting other people's productivity with the way that I communicate. So this is a good reminder kind of for me that I had like 2 years ago. This is relevant. This is going to be relevant to you as students that are learning. This is also going to be relevant to you as professionals in your job, especially if you end up working in a remote position. And this is also just useful to you if you're, as a software engineer, you're going to have to communicate and ask for help, online, whether it's in chat groups or forums, GitHub, Stack Overflow. All of the advice that you're going to hear today applies to that. So, all right, this is a trick question, or maybe it's not a trick question, but what is the most important skill that you can master as a software developer? Would anyone, I'm going to call on people because no one's going to volunteer.
I'd like
research.
to volunteer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we have volunteers.
Hi, I'm Asaya. I'm based in Texas, and I'm part of the STAR intro programming course class. Yeah. And I'd say that the most important skill to master is communication.
Woo! You got it. It is a textbook answer, but it's also correct. There's a reason it's a textbook answer. Whoa. Yes. So communication. And obviously this is not just true for software engineering. This is true for like pretty much any profession. Maybe I'm sure there are professions where this doesn't matter, but for the most part, we interact with people, and this is critical. And in software engineering, though, I mean, communication sort of spans in a lot of places. Obviously, there's verbal communication, but written communication when you're doing like pull requests or submitting issues to GitHub, asking for help on Stack Overflow, or even just writing code, like thinking about, I think there's a lot of ways that we sort of measure quality in code. But for me, one of the biggest measures of quality code is how well the code communicates its intent to other people, for other human beings. So when they read your code, they understand you're not only doing something with your code, you're teaching them about what you're doing and why you're doing it, in the way that you name things, in the way that you write comments, et cetera, et cetera. That's just kind of high level why communication is important. So most of us are used to real-time in-person communication because that's how we talk IRL and meet space, call it what you will. And for those of you who've never had like a remote job, you may not be used to this more like async and remote communication. So async communication is just a fancy term to say like communication that doesn't happen in real time. So forms of async communication that you're probably already familiar with and use are like text, email, and then there's like any sort of messaging program, right? Anything where you're not guaranteed to get a response right away. Like if I were to ask my wife, well, sometimes my communication with my wife is async. Like she's doing something, I'll ask her a question and I don't get a response right away. That happens, but that's not a good example of async communication. Let's see. Yes, so there are some critical differences between like real time and in person and async and remote communication to keep in mind, and that's that the context is really different. So in real time communication or in communication, in real life, you have things like you have non-verbal cues, things like body language, or verbal cues like tone of voice. You have the situation. You have the ability to talk back and forth really fast, interrupt each other if you need to. And then you have other contexts like, your relationship with that person, the shared knowledge and understanding that you have. But in async communication, you lose a bunch of stuff, right? You can't see the person, you can't hear the tone of voice, which is why emojis are really important. You don't know what the situation is when you're messaging them. Like, is this person in a, in an office, if somebody were in a meeting, you wouldn't like go into the meeting and ask them a coding question, right? You can see they're in a meeting and like, I'm gonna interrupt them later. Or if they look really focused, maybe you decide, okay, I'm gonna ping them later. But in async communication, you don't know what they're up to. They might be busy, but you're just gonna message them anyways. And then responsiveness, this is key. Like in verbal communication or real-time communication, you get like immediate feedback, but you don't, you kind of lose that in async communication. So, which makes it so that when you communicate in an async manner, like via written communication, you have to be more intentional about providing more information up front, because in verbal communication, you can start by saying like, hi, okay, hello, I'm stuck. Okay, what are you stuck on? Oh, this is broken. Oh, have you tried this? Or can I see this? And there's a lot of there can be a lot of back and forth, and it's easy and effortless. But when you transpose that to async communication, where you're like texting with someone and maybe they're busy and not responding right away, so your feedback loop is slow, and you're interrupting somebody every time you ask them a question, so it becomes a lot more painful in that context. So yes, when you ask for help, online, I think the key thing is don't just ask for help, and then we'll talk about and ask for help in a way that's productive for all parties. So yes, if you go and just be like, hey, I'm stuck, stuff's broken, to someone online, I mean, the first thing they're gonna have to do is be like, please give me some more context. I cannot help you with your problem. I cannot read your mind. So these are like 4 things that some of these are obvious. I think the last one was maybe less obvious, but that should be your goal when asking for help. The first item there is to communicate your problem specifically and clearly. And so I have a special format that I like to share with people. So if somebody says, I have a problem, I'll usually ask them, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you expecting to see? And what are you seeing instead? So you're saying, this is high level what my problem is. I was expecting to see this result, but instead I'm seeing this result. So that's just a clear baseline for the person that you're asking, to understand what the problem is that you're actually facing. So okay, now that the person knows what your issue is, the next most important thing is to provide all the relevant information up front that's going to help that person like solve the problem for you without having to ask you for more information. Because if you don't provide any of this, then the next thing you're going to get is, hey, like, can you give me more information about the problem? And what that information looks like in the context of development, code snippets are really helpful. I love it when people send me just like a screenshot, and that's a really lightweight, easy way of sharing code. Just screenshot your text editor and be like, this is my problem, this is my code. If you're actually having bugs, then stack traces are super helpful. And if you're like in Rails, that would be stack traces in your Rails console. If you're dealing with React, you would open your developer tools and go to console. And just copy and paste, like, I mean, you can copy and paste the whole stack trace. Slack has like a snippet thing that will let you post long code, or at least, at the very least, like post 30 or 50 lines of the top of your stack trace. That should probably give the person who's helping you a lot of information. Documentation links. So the person you're asking help for might not always be familiar with a specific technology or library or whatever it is that you're using. So if you know they're not, or you're not sure they're not, it can be helpful to provide documentation to those things. Because even if they're not familiar with it, they just because they're like, they may know more about code or have more experience, they may be able to read those docs in a way that you can't, and get you an answer there. And then there's minimal reproduction. So I don't know if you've ever browsed GitHub issues and seen these, but oftentimes you'll have people posting bugs or help on open source projects, and they'll say, hey, I'm having this issue, like here's a link to my code. And their code might be doing 10 other things, and it's using a library to do this one thing. And the maintainers will respond back and say, hey, can you create a minimal reproduction? Because from their perspective, they don't know like if your code is causing the issue or if their code is causing the issue. But in any case, and I do this for work all the time, not necessarily in the context of just submitting bug reports to open source projects, where like if I have a challenging problem, I'll try to recreate that exact same, the conditions that cause the problem in like a separate repo or on a separate page. And that's just a really helpful debugging tip in general. It's probably not the first thing you should do because it's kind of a heavyweight technique, but if you're stuck on something for like over 3 hours, you may want to consider narrowing down and reproducing the issue so that you can really focus on solving the issue and ignore kind of the rest of the code that's just doing other stuff. Okay, point number 3, demonstrate that you've tried to solve it yourself. This one is just important because if you, surefire way to just piss people off and burn bridges is like constantly ask them questions that you didn't like try to solve yourself. It's just, I mean, like I think most people have a lot of goodwill and want to help out, but if you are not showing that you're willing to put in like any amount of work, like doing a Google search, Stack Overflow, trying a few things, trying to debug things a little bit, then you're just gonna get on people's nerves because you'll probably be asking them really, really simple questions that they feel like you could probably figure out yourself with a little bit of research. Having said that, it's also, I think, important to convey, and this is advice that I don't necessarily hear, but I think it's really critical, both for students, but even in a professional context, because I think especially with developers, it's like a lot of ego and pride, and then I think a lot of developers don't like admitting when they don't know something. But that can really hinder communication. Like if you are stuck on a problem and you're not able to solve it, it could be because you have just a lack of knowledge about something. But if you pretend that you know that's something, or you don't say that you don't know it, the developer on the other side may not know that you don't know, and they just assume you know because they know. It creates misunderstanding, and it's much easier to just admit what you don't know, or say what you know, what you don't know, what you're not sure of, and they'll help the other person figure out like how they should address this problem. And in a learning context, it is especially important because you're not just trying to solve a problem, you're trying to learn concepts, and so then the person who's helping you out can can try to explain that specific thing that you don't understand, and maybe just by doing that you'll actually be able to solve the problem yourself. Yes, so this is key. Like, don't be afraid to tell people that you don't know. I've been doing this for 10 plus years. I still say I don't know all the time. There's a lot of stuff I don't know. And the more you do development, the more you realize that there's so much that you don't know. So don't get a big head, that's what I'm saying. And if you follow all these steps when asking questions, there's actually a pretty good chance that you're going to solve your problem yourself. Now, is anyone familiar with this rubber duck, or not this rubber duck, but rubber ducking in general? Yeah. Oh man, your name tags aren't on anymore. So hang on. I'm gonna call on you, person who just raised your hand. No. Okay. Anyways, so for those of you who don't know, rubber ducking is this idea like that if you're trying to solve a problem or you're stuck on something, then just the act of explaining it out loud, as if you're explaining it to another person, can actually help you solve the problem, because your main problem was that you didn't understand the problem well. And then once you try to explain it to someone else, you get clarity, and immediately you spot the mistake, the error, the bug, the solution, whatever it is. So you can do this with other people. I'll often do this. I'll be like, I'll talk through something to someone, and then midway through that, or sometimes just I'll start typing the problem out and realize, oh, I know what the issue is. Some people actually buy rubber ducks and put them on their desks and find it helpful to talk to an actual rubber duck. I'll admit I've never done that, but I guess it's effective if you can really believe that the rubber duck is listening. Yeah. So, anyways, that concludes kind of this little mini presentation today. So yeah, and just like to add something to keep in mind is like when you're asking for help, especially from I think your like mentors in Code the Dream or other folks, like I think generally like, everyone wants to help, but you don't, like, obviously we have our lives, we have our jobs, like things are busy. So the more context you can give upfront, the more likely it is will help you and will help you fast. Because one of the big questions that I kind of ask myself when I get a question and I don't have any context, or is like, how long is it going to take me to fix this? Like, do I have to schedule a call and then jump on a call without any sort of context on what the issue is? Like, this call could be an hour-long call. I don't know. So it makes me like not want to do it or push it up as much as possible, because like it's hard to schedule like an hour-long call just at a moment's notice. So then that might delay like your answer. Whereas if you provide the context up front, somebody might be like, oh yeah, 2-line response, I'll do that right away. And then all right, I'll stop my sharing. Anyways, hopefully that was useful. That's the extent of the talk. Does anyone have any questions or comments, or just like, oh yeah, I can relate to that either on the receiving end or on the, oh shit, I've been asking questions really poorly.
I can definitely relate to coming like stumped on a problem, and then once I'm typing it, trying to like make sense to it, trying to get some feedback, I realize there's like the aha moment, the lightning bulb strikes, and then I realize, oh, I should do this, and then I never send the message because I was able to find the solutions.
Yeah. Alex, before y'all joined, Alex brought up an interesting point that I hadn't really considered, and that's for people for whom English is like a second or third language, it can be challenging to communicate. So I wonder, like, yeah, I don't have any solutions to that. I'm just kind of wondering, does this approach still work in those situations? Would it help maybe to like write out the problem in your own language and then maybe just translate it after, so you're not trying to focus on like thinking in a different language and formulating a problem at the same time? I don't know.
Hey, Pierre, I can't answer your question because English, I think, is my first language in a room. I have the dialect that is a tribal language. I learned Portuguese as a Portugal because Angola is colony. And now I learned English for work and to survive. But whatever your language, if you are learning something, special coding, because the coding is most the literature books are in English.
Yeah.
And Portuguese, we don't have so many terms to define, like even you are doing the code C plus, printf, print always in English. You cannot translate.
Yeah.
If you translate, it will be a mess, and it's better to stick thinking, even in poor English, but try to find a solution in English, thinking as an English speaker. It's a challenge there because, but you need to do something. That is the challenge to be programmer, to be developer, wherever. If you want to grow up doing something and have your results, you must embrace the challenges.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess unfortunately that means it's just another barrier that you have to overcome if you're not a native English speaker to learn programming. But it certainly does seem like most of the world's resources are in English. Mary Alice asked a question here. When, how vital is it to include lots of specifics like type of machine, what your OS is, what your version of whatever you're working on is, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, I mean, it depends on the problem, right, that you're trying to solve. Typically, if you're including like your machine type, OS, versions, you're probably debugging some issue. Like there's some bug and it's probably in one of your libraries that you're using, and it may only affect your operating system. So in those situations, I mean, step one would be to try to confirm that, hey, this bug is reproducible in a different OS version or a different library version or something. So I would say that type of really specific information is probably most relevant when you're trying to install software or use or debugging like some sort of software package, like a Ruby gem or an NPM package that maybe uses like a native binary. It's not. I would say most of the time that information is not relevant, unless the other context where this would be really relevant, though, is if your programming environment has a diverse array of clients. So, for example, when you're doing web development, like JavaScript development or CSS, like you may have CSS that renders correctly or renders one way in Chrome, renders a different way in Safari. Same thing with JavaScript. I work on a telemedicine product for my day job, so we're using some like pretty cutting edge web APIs, and we're also on like mobile browsers and all that stuff. So it can get hairy, and in that context, it's important. So I guess the answer to your question is kind of like, it depends. Churro says the vocabulary holds me back from asking for sure. Yeah, that's a challenge. I guess I would say try anyways. Push yourself to do it. You're probably going to get better results by asking than by not asking.
It's like Lauren has her.
Yeah.
Her hand.
Lauren, would you like to?
Yeah, I was just going to build on what Mary Alice said. I feel like I'm someone who's really long-winded when I ask questions, and I've probably tried a lot of different things already if I'm getting to the point of asking for help or feedback. So how much, I guess, in your experience is just personal style with how much context you include, or like culture, that kind of thing? How do you balance that?
I mean, long-winded. That's not. Are you talking about written communication or like spoken communication?
I mean, sometimes both. Often
Yeah.
written more so, or I'll like write a novel and then condense it back down to 2 sentences or things like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, when it comes to written communication, the advantage there is you can kind of edit yourself, right? If you're naturally long-winded, write it out. Maybe condense it. I mean, I would say the more details you provide, the better. Some of them maybe it's better to overshare details than to undershare details for sure, because you can always ignore the irrelevant ones. Having said, like using concise language is helpful because it helps the other person just read your question faster without having to read a novel. Earlier I was saying, like, when I joined this company, I had my manager give me a talking to, because my natural communication style is the stream of consciousness. So like I may provide all the details like that I'm talking about, but I'll usually do it by like in like 5 messages instead of 1. So I've had to catch myself and be like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna write this out properly, format it, then send it. So just edit myself before I send it, which is very different from verbal communication or our natural styles of communicating. So it's definitely something you have to be intentional about. Yeah. Right.
Thank you.
Okay, we got questions streaming in. Curtis, I'm American and I can barely speak English, so I never feel bad about asking questions. Yes. And you know what? If you are feeling embarrassed because you know 2 or 3 languages, like, don't feel embarrassed, because most Americans speak 1. So you're ahead. Type into Google Translate, copy. Yeah, I mean that's valid. Sometimes I speak French and English, and sometimes, but my French is not as fluent. Sometimes I'll find it easier when I'm communicating French to write it in English, Google Translate it, and then edit it. I don't mind long-winded because I can skim, but at least I have the information. I agree, Crystal, better to have more details than less. Ditto to what Curtis said. I've also had a bad habit of using phrases that make sense in certain cultures, but not others. I think that's just hilarious. That's just the fun of being like human and working in a cross-cultural environment, is the potential for confusion and just for funny phrases. Like, my mom's Cambodian, and Cambodian expressions are hilarious, and she'll say them in English sometimes, and they kind of make sense, but it's hilarious. I wish I could think of a good example, but I don't. I think it's helpful to be patient and try to rephrase when it seems like the person helping you doesn't get what you're trying to say. If they aren't being equally respectful and patient with you, don't be afraid to say, I think we're having trouble communicating effectively. I'm going to try and ask someone else who makes it better, in a better way for me. Yeah, I think it's valid. Oh man, we still have people coming in now. They're gonna be disappointed. Hello, people who are coming in or joining late. I'm sorry, but the talk's already over. We're just doing a question section. But hi, welcome. Anyone else have any comments or things of the sort?
I was thinking maybe for those who would rather find it easier to type it in their native language, that they could type it in their native language and then try to summarize in English, or suggest, like, could you please translate this if you want to help, like, or put it into Google Translate and just post, and this is the Google Translate version of it. And we'll try to work it out so that at least they're still able to ask. And because we're so diverse now, there's maybe some programmers who actually speak the same language as you and can read it just fine. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about in a more like a public context then, like obviously, because in a one-on-one situation, if you know the other person doesn't speak the language, it's
well, I actually made a channel, though I seem to be the one who mostly uses it, called Code Problem Solving.
Okay.
And that's like a place to post your request for help.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could share it in the interns channel if people haven't got it. But yeah, I test the universe.
That's a good point too. Like, I think if you're going to ask for help, it makes sense, I think, to reach out in a public forum first before you hit up a mentor, because some other student may have already solved it or knows, what that issue is. And you might get an answer faster that way. Right? And then there's also some shared knowledge, or maybe a mentor drops in there is like, oh, I know the answer. But then you can rely on like the hive, not just one person's availability. Lauren says we have guest account and have limited Slack access. Crystal, I think that one was for you.
For me, I can add people. So it's just a matter of like, if you're interested, I can just add you to it.
Maybe ping Crystal in Slack, that way she'll have your username. We can add you easily. Otherwise, she's got to translate Zoom to Slack.
I'll work on
it. Okay. All right. Well, I guess that wraps up the session. Thanks, everyone. Was that show of hands? Like, was that helpful? I'm just not trying to get validation. Like, oh, but like, was that content actually helpful, or is this stuff that you feel like you know pretty well? Or like 50-50, if it's 50-50, do this. Oh. Yeah.
Pierre, this is Lori. I think that was really helpful. I don't know if you have time or not, but I think it's always helpful for me, like when I was in a Code the Dream class, to see examples of like, okay, here's one issue that you're having. Here's a bad question, or a less helpful way to ask the question, and here is a really helpful way to ask a question. I wonder if there's anything like that to construct.
Well, I don't want to share my screen and call people out directly by sharing that in Slack. But I mean, I think there's definitely a scale, but please, if there's one thing you take away from this, is like, when you're asking a question, please don't just like have a one sentence question. Like, if you're asking a question in one sentence, you're probably missing context, especially if it's something that's specific to your code. Because I will get things and say, hey, I'm having trouble with lesson 1.4. Can we jump on a call? And like, I mean, I'll jump on the call, but it's debatable whether we actually need a call. I may have been able to solve that faster in Slack immediately. Yeah, sorry.
Javier, do you have a question?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Javier, do you have a question?
Yes. No, I just wanted to expand on some of the things that you said. And Crystal, if you speak Spanish, like you could ask, there's a lot of Spanish speakers here, so I'm pretty sure like, they could like help you out. And I did some of that in Code Tenderloin, and it kind of helps you like even reinforce what you know by explaining it like in Spanish. And also like in my case, it's a tough like learning curve to learn a new project and to get up to speed. And sometimes it could be intimidating to ask for help. You want to do some research and get something done and then ask questions. But just in my case, just wanted to let people know, just ask questions and don't waste too much time.
Yeah, and I think coding is probably especially challenging with language differences, because even if you have like two coders speaking the same language, like speaking English and talking to each other, if they're using different terminology to describe the same things, that would be challenging. And so with a different language, I can see how that would be really extra challenging, because precision of language is kind of important when you're talking about code. Yeah.
I will say this much. I think like the beauty of it, especially when you're all learning the same tech stack, is that once you get over like the barriers, just the overall communication barriers, right? And you're talking technical, that actually helps make things easier and for you to make those connections. Because like, for example, if you're trying to resolve an issue related to like your controller, right? Everyone knows at this point, I would hope, like being in the, speaking from my class, right? My Rails class, if I say I'm having an issue with an update method in this controller, and then maybe providing additional specifics, those terminology, because we're all kind of studying it, should be hopefully easy to pick up. But I mean, there were times during the class where we all met up, and I know that there were definitely some communication barriers that we had to overcome. And I think the other thing is just kind of being patient. Sometimes what really helps me is I just close my eyes and just really try to just listen. I also have to use that at work as well, because I work with a lot of folks from India, and it's like the cadences of how they speak English can even be difficult to pick up. So like I really gotta like close my eyes and just try to process everything, and maybe play it back in my head a couple of times. I mean, it's no matter how many different ways we go about trying to resolve it, it's always going to pose a challenge, I think, especially because we're in a space and careers that are spanning across the globe. So you could potentially be working with people on the other side of the country. It's going to take effort, I think, and a willingness, and then patience, most importantly.
Yeah, I think that's real. I've worked with people all over Eastern Europe, India, Africa, and cross-cultural communication is hard. And sometimes it's just, sometimes it's even just like understanding maybe a strong accent or something like that. And sometimes in those contexts, written communications actually helps. I'll find that, I'm working with one developer who like I have a really hard time understanding him when he talks, but he's an amazing developer, and written communication is perfectly fine. So we've sort of stuck to that as our primary method of communication. All right. Well, it's lunchtime for those of us in North Carolina, so should probably release y'all and let you eat, and for the rest of you, sleep. Chung, I think it's bedtime for you, right?
I'm 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's past bedtime. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Hope you have a good Thursday.